Tomorrow morning, everybody, and welcome over to our YouTube channel, Wayapa Work. So today we're doing day 3 of 14 days of Wayapa. So today I'm actually a bit excited to talk about the moon. As I mentioned before in our short little clip, or if you didn't see that, you just come here to our channel to watch the little Wayapa Work tidbits. We want to talk a little bit about the moon and how it affects us. So when we teach it in the course, when we teach it in the practice, it's about connecting in with the cycles of the moon. Okay, so about connecting into how those new moon cycles actually can affect us and how it has an impact on us emotionally and physically. So you learn a bit about that in the course. It's about sharing your stories as well. So we talk about, in Wayapa, we talk about learning it from an environmental perspective, how the environment is actually just doing its thing and we're just a very small part of that. In Wayapa we talk about how we personally view and see the moon, so how the moon and the cycles of the moon affect us. But then there's also the cultural levels and the cultural overlays of the moon. And it's about talking about those stories. You know, there's been some great ones. I mean, I remember growing up and I'll digress a little bit here, but you know, Mr. Squiggle, the man from the moon. And when you used to look at the moon, a full moon, there's almost like a shape like Mr. Squiggle there, yeah? So, you know, there's all these stories about the moon. And, you know, we had stories up in home in Gippsland about the moon, how the moon was a man, he was a hunter, and how he actually got tricked by Briwen, the wind, and, you know, he got blown up into the sky and become the moon. He was actually hunting an emu, that emu ngarain. He actually got put up into the sky and become stars. So the moon is still chasing those stars across the sky. So, you know, traditional stories all across Australia, all across the world, had different ways that they actually looked at and viewed, you know, the stories that were in the stars. I know last night Sayers sat out in the dark time here watching the stars. No moon, because the moon actually had set by the time the sun had set. And, you know, that's what I was talking about in the little video clip at the start, just on our page, was about we have this perception that the moon only comes out at night. And that isn't true. The moon is actually out during the day just as much as it is during the night. It's only when it starts to actually starts to become from the new moon into a full moon and starts to quarter through is that you actually start to see it. And, you know, in the next few days you'll actually start to see the moon coming up later and later until eventually it'll come up full. As the sun's setting, the full moon will come up. This next moon is going to be really powerful, so I want to talk a little bit about that. Talk a bit about how, you know, the moon is actually going to be close to the earth. So when we talk about a super moon, it's talking about the orbit of the moon and how the moon is actually going to appear a little bit closer. And it's also a blue moon, and a blue moon comes into a calendar month twice. So that's what a blue moon is. So if you hear the saying once in a blue moon, it's because the moon is actually in a calendar month twice. So we have one on the 3rd, and then we're going to have one on the 31st of January. So, you know, it's a bit of a irregularity. That's why they say only in a blue moon. So, you know, so with Wayapa you start to learn all these stories, and that's been one of the biggest things that, you know, I get to share the stuff that I learn. But the amazing thing about Wayapa is when you actually do Wayapa in a group of people, listening to their stories, not just their personal stories or their scientific stories that they have about how the moon affects us and how it affects the plants growing, how it affects everything on the planet, the tides, but also how the cultural stories behind it. I remember there was a lady that we taught from Italy, and she talked about La Luna and how the moon in her culture was feminine. In our culture up in home, different cultures had different ways of seeing it. So again, it's about that is the beautiful thing about Wayapa, is that there's no one way and there's no one thing about it. It's actually about the actual environment that it actually is. It is what it is, whatever you want to call it. The moon, Larain, Taru, whatever word you call the moon, it's still the moon. So that's the beautiful thing about Wayapa. That's the thing that I think that Wayapa, the amazing thing about Wayapa is the word. It means to join and connect. You know, when you join and connect and do a session of Wayapa and you start to share with other people, you start to get all this other beautiful tapestry of knowledge and richness in there, which is quite amazing. So it is getting a little bit dark, and we didn't do any video today because it's